y'all inside Hot Topics with Lady Charmaine, and I got a couple of girlfriends in the building with me. I'm really excited because my girl Sharie, of course, y'all know her, Miss Sharie Wilson. She is the owner or co-owner of Dream Girls Beauty now. Dream Girls Beauty. And then we also have author in the building. She goes by the name of Fayette Latrice. She's the author of a book. It's entitled A Life Living, Loving, and Forgiving. A Life Worth Living, Loving, and Forgiving. That we're going to be talking about that. And we also have licensed mental health clinician. She is a licensed clinical social worker. Her name is Nia Ridgle. Prayerfully, I didn't mess that up, Miss Nia. She specializes in healing and supporting Black African men and women, in addition to high-achieving women from all backgrounds. I love that because, boy, this is a time of healing. This is a time that we are literally, not just COVID, there were so many things that has happened to us that we're really coming into our own now, and people are, as they say, becoming woke. We're kind of waking up a little bit into our own. But today on this show, I asked these ladies to come and join me on this show today because there was a conversation a friend of mine actually posted on Facebook. And I said, oh my goodness, that is a hot topic. So everyone, I'm going to read this conversation to you that was actually posted. And then we're actually going to go into the conversation. She posted, so yesterday, I spoke to a person that I hadn't spoke with in months, but I've known for years. The individual told me that their daughter got beat up by her baby's daddy. Further in the conversation, the person said, my daughter is lucky. And she wanted to know why. She said, do you know this individual at least she has someone to beat her up? She was like, what in the hell? Then the individual then proceeds to explain that the daughter isn't alone, so she's blessed. And the individual goes on to tell her that they are lonely. So she said, so Facebook, is this what single people resort to? It's never okay to resort to domestic violence. But wow, low self-esteem. I feel sorry for everyone involved. Why? As a mother, what are you teaching your children? As a woman, do you not know your worth? She said, I'm sure the man is probably confused as to why this is accepted. It's just a messed up situation all the way around. All the way around. So I want to start off with the therapist in the room. Hi. So Miss Nia, when you hear something like this, I want you to share with us your thought process. And that's why I titled this show, Have You Ever Been Encouraged by Someone to Stay in a Bad Relationship or an Unhealthy Relationship? Because when I first read this, it reminded me of something that my grandmother told me when I was 15 years old, that I should let my husband beat me up because she was in an abusive relationship. So I wanted to talk to you about that. What are your thoughts?
I have a lot of thoughts about this. First of all, specifically to the story, I think that we're talking about generational trauma when we talk about a mother telling a daughter that she should allow a man to hit her. So that's one section that I definitely want to cover because we're talking about learned behavior being passed down generationally that is not of value in yourself.
Right.
And then I want to talk about how hurt people raise children. And then those hurt children then become victims of either domestic violence, sexual assault, or they become predators themselves, right? So I think there's a lot of things that we can begin to unpack this because culture also has a lot to do with it, especially within the Black community around how we even label domestic violence, right? So some women, they are so prone to seeing violence around their neighborhood and in their home. Being hit by your spouse or your partner could be a sign of love. So we don't even know in what context she was giving her that information, right? But when I hear her saying at least she has someone to love, I hear, first of all, a very hurt person who's raising a child in pain and then transferring that pain on to her child. And then that's how her child receives love in addition to that, right? So then now that's a conditioning that family as a whole has to heal from. And when we talk about like different facets around the mental health space, these are what stigmas come into place because obviously that family needs some form of healing. And sometimes that form of healing could be by that mother saying, okay, there's something I'm missing in my life. Maybe I should go and seek therapy to support me so that I can be a better support for my daughter. Also, too, like a lot of times we see parents as being the one who has the answers, and we forget that parents sometimes are hurt children that are raising children, right? So I just see a lot of different things that we can unpack from that, but I want to just, stand for that mother and show her empathy, because I can feel the hurt that she must be carrying with her every day. She's working in this, she's loving in this, she's obviously raising her children in this, and I think that, like, as a culture, this is more common than what we talk about, right? This is something that, like, even I too have been told, wives tell about what love is supposed to look like from a man, right? So I think it's a lot of things that we can come from, but at the end of the day, we're talking about hurt women raising children.
You said something that stuck out to me. You was talking about maybe needing some counseling or therapy, but how would she get to the point of even knowing that she even needs therapy if she thinks that her daughter has someone who loves her? How can you get her to change her mind to be able to be a support to her daughter?
I think that the conversation would have to ask a lot of questions around why. A lot of times people speak out of turn, but don't think about their thoughts, right? So if I was a friend supporting her, I would ask her questions around, like, why does she feel like that's okay? And who told her that that's okay? But not coming from a standpoint of, like, I'm judging her, but from a standpoint of seeking to understand. And that's when I think effective listening skills, especially when you're going to be a support to someone who's coming from that type of pain, comes into play. So I always tell my clients, listen 80% and respond 20%, but only respond 20% when you're seeking to understand, not seeking to kind of direct a person. Because in a conversation like that, you're having intimacy with that person, right? So you're asking that person to share their heart with you, right? And you can tell already that there's some conflict between herself and herself. So if she can't have an intimate relationship with herself, it may be difficult. She may find it difficult to have an intimate conversation about her pain to someone else. So she may come off as, I know it already, and she'll fight for her ego rather than address her pain.
That is so true. It looked like you were kind of like resonating with something she was saying.
Wow,
Go ahead.
wow. I love it. Thank you so much. You hit on so many topics, but I think the biggest one for me was we bring our childhood experiences into our adult life. It's how we show up. And that's modeled, actually, that is how the mother related to her daughter. And it actually made me think about my own experience when I was in my 20s and getting married. And I remember really being on the fence. And my mother was so happy that I was getting married that she said, you can learn to love him. Like, get over it. Just do it. And for her, she grew up in domestic violence and was also in a domestic violent relationship with my father. So that's what I lived with. And I actually could have been that person that said, you know what, or was drawn to that lifestyle. But instead, I ran from that lifestyle. I had a few close calls, but for the most part, I just ran from it. But I know, like you, I'm empathetic to the mother also, and wish I could just be in her life to say the why. Why do you feel that way? And even with the daughter. So I think that's when it's a village. I think that's when the community, a family and friends, somebody needs to step up and just have that conversation and get her to that point of therapy.
Why do you think people feel that if they are beat up or somebody handles them aggressively, that is a sign of love?
I think sometimes people hurt so much that they'll take whatever they can get. And if that person who they're attached to can only give them love in that way, then that's what they'll take, right? And that's a conversation around value. Like, how much do you value yourself? And you can see value all throughout a person's lifestyle. Like, it doesn't just show up in their relationships. It shows up in how they take care of themselves hygienically. It shows up in with the places that they work at, the environments that they live in, the friends that they align themselves with. It shows up in a lot of different places. And, I feel that a lot of times, even with myself, I'm having to struggle with what owning my value really looks like, because I come from really humble beginnings. And I feel like I shared this with you last night, that I feel like I'm the first woman in my family to really take the wellness journey walk to where I'm having to really have hard truth conversations with myself around, like, why do I think and behave in a certain manner? Because I used to think what was told to me, that prestige made you value yourself, right? But then now I have the prestige, but the mannerisms behind the closed doors in my personal life weren't aligning to where it was becoming a conflict. So a lot of African American people, that's what I can speak to because I'm a Black woman having a Black experience. We do a lot of outside validations rather than inside validations because those are the things that, just systematically we were taught that our basic human rights were gifted to us, So, like, if we are able to attain a certain status, we shouldn't be behaving a certain way. And that's just a myth that we have to, as a culture, kind of dismantle and see where mental health will really help our community really thrive in that area.
You know what, you said something that reminded me of Kerry Washington's character in Scandal. Okay, I mean, she was a fixer. The girl was bad. Wardrobe was bad, but she was involved in infidelity, sleeping with the president. Looked like she was a woman that had it all,
right,
but yet still broke in to be in that type of relationship.
Right.
You just hit a point on that.
Yeah, we glorify that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about broken pieces and how to pick up those broken pieces. Like you said, having the prestige. We have the look, but in the inside, we are broken. And how do we mend those pieces? And Sharie, I got a couple questions for you as well. And I got a song that just simply reminds me of this. It's called The Jones Girls. I just love that man. We're back inside Hot Topics with Lady Charmaine, my girl Sharie Wilson, also Nia Ridgle, and also Fayette Latrice. We are talking about being in a bad relationship, being encouraged to continue to be in a bad relationship. But Nia, who is an actual licensed clinical therapist, she hit on a couple of things. So if you guys want to chime in on this show, give us a call, 916-921-5333. If you got a question for any one of the ladies here, if you got a question for Nia. But Sharie, she was hitting on some stuff during the break, too. Now, I can't repeat what you said, so I'm going to let you say it. Okay.
Well, okay. I was just saying, I always say self-evaluation is the best evaluation. And when you can find yourself in the problem, then only then can you become the solution to the problem.
Right.
So for myself, I'm always looking at myself. At any situation I'm in, I'm trying to see how am I part of the problem. And then when I look at myself as being part of the problem, then I always find solutions. And 100% of the times, it's something that I can do different, and even that person that's staying in that relationship, they have to look at themselves and say that I'm part of this problem too, because I'm staying. And what has happened to me in the past that has caused me to settle or stay in something like this. So that's when you got to go deep and really deal with those wounds. It's things that could happen when you was 5 or 6 or 7 that just have held on to you and that you just won't let go. And then when you really think about it and sit down, you be like, oh, I do remember when I witnessed my uncle slap my da-da-da-da. Or I did remember when my dad said A, B, and C. And those things, you don't think so, but they carry on and they become wounds when we are adults and we act out of those wounds. We just do.
So when is the time that you acknowledge that you're acting out of something that you may have experienced at a young age? And when do you realize that that's something that you have suppressed? Let's talk to you, Miss Faye.
Yeah. Well, it can take a long time. But I think if you have that community, that support, and somebody that can just talk to you and just bring that out of you. But it took me years. And actually writing the book, it uncovered and opened up a lot of wounds that I thought, oh, I was over that. But I realized that I really wasn't. So I think it really, really it takes time. And I know we talk a lot about domestic violence, but just all unhealthy lifestyles, that cause you to just, whether it's drug use, whether it's sexual behavior, there's so many layers, there's so many different things, but at the end of the day, it's just that community. And I think there has to be people that are aware, that notice it, that are brave enough too. And I think especially with our young girls, with our young women, teens, not just, young adults, but our teens, but having people that are just able to just step to them or support them or talk to them, because we're like constantly battling all of the social media images, right? Everything, not only social media, but television, entertainment. It's like we're not only dealing with things that we may have grown up with or things that are now displaying in our adult life, but now we have all these influences,
right?
That are, causing a huge impact too.
That's
Absolutely.
true. Now, Nia, I want to ask you a question because I remember we were talking last night, and there are certain behaviors that can come out of certain childhood experiences that may be showing up in our adult life, and that we had no idea that it was a root from certain childhood experiences. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah. So right now, in the mental health space, we are facing a crisis among suicide amongst youth. So the national age is going down to the age of 7 when suicidal attempts start to happen with young children, and it's because of the influence of social media. Right, they're getting really exposed to a lot of ways of living, lifestyles, and that maybe their parents can afford. They feel helpless and hopeless to their circumstance and their situation, and you have to look at a childlike mindset where they're in that state. You can't think really cognitively around like problem solving skills, rationality, things making sense in life, right? Because they're not supposed to be exposed to a lot of those things, right? So in our generation, like we were protected because we really only knew what we saw, right? And so now the children are being exposed, and we're not keeping up with the technology, and then the parents are out of the home more because the cost of living is going up. Material things are becoming more of a trend now because of social media too. So it's kind of like we're fighting a lot of different forces that generationally we didn't really have in the past. Like, of course, we had our layers of our issues, but now it's becoming exacerbated to where it's getting out of control. But the silencing behind the preventative measures are really just not getting the due diligence that it needs, right? So then we're coming up against that. And then too, so if you're thinking about, okay, a 7-year-old is thinking about suicide attempts, right? What is that mindset of that 7-year-old? How is that 7-year-old's communication around what they're experiencing or feeling, and are they even safe enough in their home to even share that, right? And I'll even give a example of my daughter. So I was a young mother coming up, and so my daughter saw me go through all my stages of evolution, especially going through school, right? So I went from, I'm a single mother, help me, right? Help me, to then, okay, I'm a career woman. I really don't get that much support anymore because I'm too broke to say that I'm too broke because I need help, right? Because I got all these school loans, but then I make too much to really qualify for anything. So we were kind of like in that limbo to now I'm more established in my career. And so she's going through all those journeys with me, and it has played a part in her development, right? As a child. But I was so in my growth, right, that I really didn't get to see that behind the scenes. She was showing up as like not wanting to be a burden on top of the burdens that I had, right? And so I think I look at my circumstance and my situation, and I'm in the field of mental health, and I didn't catch that, right? So how much are we as parents not checking in on our children because we're so focused on what we have going on, just because we're trying to kind of play the cat and mouse game around like how do we keep up. So there's a lot of different dualities that we live in, and we want to shrink it down to this one problematic thing of, oh, that person doesn't value themselves, or you shouldn't let a man hit you. But it's a lot of the root causes of why we do things starts from our childhood, right? And it's really hard when you have a parent who's wounded, who's hurt, who maybe doesn't have the support group, to really speak life into them, to make them see outside of their circumstances, to even realize, hey, there may be a child here that may be watching everything you're doing and picking up and trying to make reason, or even going out into the community and getting influenced by other people because maybe you're not showing them enough attention. And in that childlike state, you really can't understand what your grown mom is going through. And where that comes from is just communication, right? A lot of apologizing. Us parents, we have to apologize to our children. It's so important to validate them. And it's never too late to say, I'm sorry. And you can't say sorry too many times, right? So that's where that ego comes in at. If you can see yourself as a problem, even when it comes to getting down to your children, humbling yourself and saying, in this situation, I didn't value myself. I didn't value myself to where I forgot to put you first because I didn't put myself first. And this is what I'm doing to rectify the situation between us, because you're the only person that matters to me before anybody else, right? And we're just not having enough of those conversations, because I had to have those conversations multiple times with my daughter, right? Because I only know what I know from the space of which I know it in.
When you know it. Yep.
Yeah, so it's just around those things where you really can't let your experience dictate the most important thing that you're supposed to be here to do, and that is be a parent, right? And the balancing in that, it really comes from you taking a really deep look in yourself and saying, what isn't working for me? And how do I need to be honest with myself first? But most importantly, who do I need to apologize to? Right. And even more importantly, how do I forgive myself?
And that can go on through generations. Because I remember when my mother and we had a conversation, and it was a whole crying situation because I felt that she wasn't there for me. She really was. She was a single mom, and she was working 16-hour days. She was working 2 8-hour shifts to make ends meet. My father, he quit his job so he wouldn't pay child support. My mom didn't know what my brother's daddy was, so it was just her. Right. So she was doing what she needed to do, but as a kid, I didn't understand that because I just wanted my mom to be there. And of course, parents always say they're doing it for you. Right. You know what I mean? But as a kid, we don't understand that. I'm doing this because I want to make sure that you have a better, brighter future. And children are looking at, what are you doing for me today? Right. They're not even looking at the future. They don't even know what that even means. And so my mother, when we had the conversation, of course, she apologized, but then she ended up getting it from her mom because my grandmother had her when she was 15, had my aunt when she was 16, and my grandmother, she was a maid, so she wasn't home often. So my mother was with her grandmother a lot, so she missed her mom. And so that's the conversation. So everybody is doing it for the family, but not really realizing the needs that our children have. Right. I'm guilty of that as well because you're trying to make it happen because you want your children to have a brighter future. Right. And then you forget about them. Right. You really didn't forget about them. You say you're doing it for them, but it's the emotional part that we need to be there being present. For. Right. There you go, being present. And that right there is so important. Not just being in the house, but being present. You can be there, but not really present. You're there, but you're on your phone. Because I remember last night, my son and I, we were watching a movie, and I had to make sure I had put my phone down, cover it up, so I couldn't. So I didn't see no notifications because you see that notification, you pick that phone up, and it's a wrap. Like it's a wrap. Yes. So just making a conscious decision to be there and be present, and that's especially with so many distractions that we have today.
I think the most important thing too is to forgive yourself. Like, I think that as mothers, we're so hard on ourselves because we think that we're supposed to be great mothers naturally, right? And that's just not true.
Because we don't have a book on this.
There's no book on that. On top of and I always just direct us towards this experience of just being a woman right now, right? Not like 20 years ago, not 30 years ago, not 40 years ago, because it's different now, right? We're expected to do more and be more multifaceted with less resources, right? To really try to delegate. I think there's a lot of opportunities, but we don't have the time to really indulge in those opportunities. So here we are in a season of abundance, but we don't have the mindset. So it's really, that's where the mental, when we call it in the Christian world, warfare comes in is because we're in the seasons of abundance where generationally things have been at our fingertips more than ever before, right? But the social conditions hasn't changed. And so although we have all these things that we can get involved in, we're really having a tug of war of what we get access to, who gets our attention first, what we're able to do, because there's so many different things that we can do. And now we have this tug of war where it's like women are out of the home and having more success, right?
It's the I am every woman syndrome.
Right. It's the I am every woman syndrome. And it's like we have to now figure out what gets to stay on our plate.
Balance.
How do we eat it? What times do we need to eat it in? Right. When do we need to take a break from eating? Right. Right. And when do we need to change our diet? Correct. Right. So it's just so many different things that we don't take into consideration that will lead a woman down the aisle of being in a relationship that just isn't for her.
That is so true. And especially, I was listening to a conversation. I was on Clubhouse this morning, and I was in a Christian group, and a young lady, she was talking about basically she has everything except the man. And I was listening to all the women give her a lot of advice, but it wasn't not one married woman. All of them was single, all telling her what she needed to do. And so I had raised my hand, but of course I didn't call on me as a woman who's been married almost 23 years. And as a woman who waited on her husband, I was listening. I had to just get off of it. Because I'm like, y'all needed to bring somebody up to that platform that's been married, that's waited, that did it. Because neither one of y'all have been married, so you really can't even tell her how to do it. because y'all have never been married. So how you going to tell her how to do something when you've never done it?
Right.
Period. You've never been married. That's good that you have the successes, but they need to hear from somebody who has been there, done that, can write a book to really give her some sound advice.
Yes, absolutely.
A lot of people who've never had children, they teach you how to raise children until they have some kids. They get a load of them. They be like, hold on. But I'm gonna tell you why I said that, because I remember when I was talking to my daughter's teacher, and I told her, I said, it won't be until you have children that you'll understand what I'm saying. I said, because when you leave your most precious gifts with someone, you want to make sure they do your kids right, your most precious gifts. Right. Do you know she remembered that conversation, and she was 8 months pregnant. Her baby was due the following month. And she came to me, it was on the playground, it was after school, and she said, Mrs. Bassett, I remember the conversation we had. And she said, right now, as I'm getting ready to have my baby, she said, I am so nervous. She said, now I realize I was too hard on these children. She said, because I don't want anybody to do that to my child. Exactly. When you have your baby, my friend who's also a school principal, I remember she had her first baby. And she remembered when I had the conversation with her, because I had to meet with the principal one time. And she came over to me. We was parked next to each other. And she was like, Mrs. Bassett, she said, oh, my goodness, it's time for me to find a preschool for my son. And I'm just so nervous. And I remember the conversation you had with me. Exactly. Because these are your children. And you want to make sure that somebody treats your children right, be it a teacher or whomever it is, because you're getting ready to drop your children off. And so me and the principal, we still good friends today. We just talked last week. But to be able to leave something with somebody, and just to be honest, even with my son's kindergarten teacher, it took her a year to send me a whole page email to apologize, but when you talk to him, you got to have some sense and some wisdom. You just can't be that angry black woman, because they're not going to hear you. But you got to leave some wisdom. And then they think about that. And like I said, she came back an entire year later with a whole email and apologized. So when you have these beautiful, precious children, and you're in a broken relationship, are there words that you can even say to your children for them not to end up in that same relationship? You know how they say, don't do as I do, do as I say. But really, kids do what you do. Mm-hmm. They do. And I say that because I shared this before. How my mom, I shared it with you last night. I think I shared it with you too, and you may have heard the story. And I shared on the radio before, when my mother used to always tell me, don't you ever let a man put his hands on you. Don't you ever let a man put his hands on you, because my dad was abusive, because he saw his mother in an abusive relationship with his stepfather. And he had ran my grandmother over with a truck. He had hit her in the forehead with a glass pitcher, to where she had to get 2 false eye implants. She had to have back surgery, so he had did her job. He was very jealous. She couldn't go to the restroom by herself. She was at somebody's house. He had to stand by the door, even at her own mother's house. He stood by the door, so she couldn't do anything. So he was very controlling. So my father, he ended up being abusive to my mom. So my mother had left my dad when I was like a year old, and she used to always tell me, never let a man put his hands on you. She meets a guy, and I never forget, they ended up getting into a fight, and he ended up giving her a black eye. So we had to go to the hospital. She had to put the little silver thing on her eye. And when we came home, she took his clothes and she threw his clothes outside on the sidewalk, as I stood there at the door. But for me as a little girl, that was very, because I was 5 going on 6. So that was a very pivotal point for me, because I had heard growing up from, like I said, 2, 3, 4, she used to tell me this all the time. So it was already drilled in my head. That was the moment that she needed to prove to me, don't just, just talk it. You got to walk it. Right. And she walked it. And I did not see that man for years later. And I was walking down the street, and he was like, aren't you Mary Ann's daughter? But so she didn't take a phone call from him. She didn't let him come back. There was no on the phone. Well, maybe we might work it out. There was nothing. She cut that thing off, and that was a huge for me. Mm-hmm. It spoke volumes. So I know, don't ever let a man put his hands on me. She even told my husband. My husband and I, how you get, we was newlyweds, and we had gotten into an argument. I was going to stay at my mama's house for a couple of days. And so my mama was like, she gonna stay at my house so y'all can cool off. And I never forget my mama told him, she said, you put your hands on her, I'ma kill you. And she meant that. Mm-hmm. And she meant that. Because I was her baby. And she was so sweet. But you put your hands on her, I'ma kill you. And he said, I would never put my hands on her. Mm-hmm. And then she and I, we walked out the door, and, and of course everything was cooled off. But she didn't play that. But as for, for children growing up and seeing that, what you got to say?
Right. No. So, I have 4 daughters, and all of them are in relationships. but I'm that mother, I am that mother that don't put your hands on my daughter. And even with my daughters having those conversations, because one of my daughters, is kind of,
they be in that relationship.
Yeah, they would be in the relationship. She would stay in it. I don't know if it was physical, but I also like to talk about that emotional abuse, right? Because that's what I've experienced more of is the emotional, mental abuse, the demeaning and making you feel like, the narcissist, right?
Right.
The narcissist making you feel like you're nothing without me. Even leaving my marriage, I had to experience that. But I am constantly having those courageous conversations with my daughters about the relationships that they're in. What do we have to do? Because I would hate for it to get to that.
Correct.
Because they do have one brother, and he's that brother that's like, don't put your hands on my sister. But I think considering what I experienced growing up, I feel like I have done well with my daughters as far as just being, we're not putting up with this. This is something that that you don't have to take. You don't have to deal with this. But again, just having those conversations, we have to have them. I wanted to say something earlier from something Nia said, and I'm sorry I can't retract it or recall it, but those conversations, the conversations like this are the conversations that we need to continue having, because some of these women or young girls may not be in that circle of friends or in those situations where they're going to hear this, right? So having shows like this, Hot Topics, I'm starting to hear more and more about, trauma-informed care and healing circles, and churches are doing more. The community, I think Black women are really, really stepping up to provide services and groups for young ladies. They're going into the schools, or they're doing things, within their own community. Those are the things that have to keep happening so that it will reach the person that it needs to reach.
What do you do when a person chooses? They have all the information, they've been talked to, their friends have even told them, but they still yet choose to stay in that situation, and their comeback is to even some of their friends, well, you don't know because you've never been in a relationship. But one thing they do know is that that's not a healthy relationship that you're in. Go ahead, Sharie.
I would just say, until they fix the root of the problem, they can leave that relationship. And when their next relationship is going to be exactly like the relationship they left, because they haven't dealt with the real issue.
Yeah.
It's something that told them or allowed them to stay in that relationship, or even be attracted to a man like that or a woman like that, because you have men that are in abusive relationships.
That's so true.
So we have to fix the root issue, because we can tell them leave him, and then when they find that next man, he's going to be the same man as the first man.
That is so true. Same man, different face, different body, same type of relationship. And I know people like that. It's like they're in the same relationship. I know a guy like that. Same type of relationship, the woman just looks different. It's just they may have the same body type, but it's just a different woman. Go ahead, Nia.
Yeah, that's called trauma bonding. Some people think that it's love, but when it really they're bonding over trauma. It can be from childhood trauma experiences where they feel like this is the only person who really gets me, who really gets what I've been going through, and because of that connection, they gain intimacy with each other, and they think that bond is love when really it's trauma.
Oh my God, that's what she was saying, because they were able to identify
with
each other
through their trauma.
Yep.
But once that person, one of the people in that relationship starts to heal, they'll start to recognize that relationship, it's not based on love. It really was based on that trauma, and then the relationship will actually start to have that connection if the other person isn't willing to heal and grow, because they no longer have that bond with each other anymore. They created a safe space within trauma.
That is so true. Ooh, that's good.
Yeah. And so after that safe space is gone for them to be living that way, then they no longer feel safe in that relationship. And that's where you get men who are controlling.
I was just telling a couple this last night, and she was saying, well, we both need to go to counseling. I mean, I could go to counseling, but what if you don't go? The issue is not going to change. And I said, but it is. You go to counseling. I said, counseling starts with you first. If he don't go, then something's going to happen with you in that counseling. It may take a month, it may take 2, it may take 3. I said, but healing's going to start with you, and either he's going to adapt or you're going to no longer stay because now you're healing yourself.
Right.
So regardless, you can't wait for somebody else to say, well, we can go to counseling together. Go by yourself. Healing starts with you first.
Oh, that is so powerful. We've been talking about trauma, but this whole trauma bonding, that is something so new. I never knew that was a term, but that is such a powerful term because you meet people that I've seen, like even people who are like drug addicts, and they do it together. You know what I mean? And when it's something that they do together, it's this bond, but it's an unhealthy bond. How does that bond form?
It forms from an unmet emotional need. And that derives from some type of childhood upbringing. So we develop out of survival mode, right? So a lot of people either think that with age you just naturally just learn how to do some things, but then I don't know if you ever met an adult who has like childlike tendencies, and you're like, how is this
Michael Jackson
grown woman like acting so childlike in her ways? It's really because that child is underdeveloped emotionally. It could be from like, so we talk about different forms of trauma. So there's small T trauma and then there's big T trauma. So small T trauma is very microaggressive. You see it microaggressive. You see it in like middle class to upper middle class households where there's no physical violence. There's just more so like maybe you had a emotionally abusive parent or caregiver. It can be like from a grandmother or a grandfather too. That also plays into a key. You have codependent parents that live vicariously through their children, who put them in sports, who make their kids really stressed out about like things that they probably shouldn't be worried about, but that parents' merit is totally based on their kids' success. Or you have a parent like that comes from a single family household who's working 16 hours a day, and maybe she can't really give that child that emotional need that they have, but because she's so busy trying to meet those financial responsibilities that she has by herself. It can come in so many different ways, right? And then you have big T trauma, which is overt trauma like sexual assault, neglect, abuse. You'll just see like that child definitely has some trauma. Well, it's coming out that trauma is trauma. It really doesn't matter. It's just big T trauma is more bitter than small T trauma. But the person's still traumatized. And a lot of times you'll see like those things are, because they're not so overt, they're overly looked, and that person shows up a certain way, right? Or lack thereof, and they're still needing those emotional needs met. So they can find those emotional needs met through the form of trauma bonding.
You was like, Sharie, what do you have to say about that?
No, that's good. That's real good.
I mean, she got us all over here like speechless.
I'm a victim of that. Real talk. I would have never thought about it in those terms, but that's real.
I think we're all kind of, we deal with trauma in some type of way. Even the strong woman, who's now, struggle all her life, came from a struggle family, struggled to try to make her own way, maybe had a child. Now she's in her career, making her money, and now she can't find a husband because it's that I'm never going to allow myself to, or I don't want to submit to, then you wonder that relationship suffer, or when you do get into a relationship, you're busy, you really can't pay attention to the home or your husband, you're not giving him what he needs, but you're like, well, listen, I gotta work, right? I got a business, I'm a strong black woman, and it's really, it's so much trauma that we're all dealing with.
Yeah. And I like that you called out even those small traumas, because we do tend to focus on the major things like maybe, sexual abuse or domestic violence. But then there are, some of those emotional things that happen in childhood that can impact how you show up in your adult life. And we don't even, and even the person doesn't even think about it, that way. Like, why am I responding or acting this way, until you go, like you said, you got to do that self-assessment and go deeper. Like, why do I respond this way? Why do I feel this way in certain situations?
And I want to bring up people pleasing.
Yes, absolutely.
Because that's a derived from trauma too. That comes from not being enough, not being seen, not feeling validated enough. So you feel like, if I do this, if I do that, if I give more, then I'll be enough. But it's not for the other person. It's for you. You're doing that for you. And so you get so used to getting affirmed outside of yourself that the more you do, the more you can show up for people, the more you feel validated.
Miss Nia, because that's actually one of the things she specializes in healing of African American men. So go ahead, Nia.
Yeah, so I created a platform, a mental wellness platform for Black men called Restoring the King. And what inspired me was I was helping women. And so the women were getting whole, they were healing, they were like, I'm losing my man because of you. You know, like they were trauma bonding, right? And then as they were getting whole, they were losing that intimate connection they had with their spouses. And so I did some research, and I was actually very devastated at what I found. There are almost little to no resources pre-COVID. I did this pre-COVID, so it was about 2019 when I started that platform. Now, since COVID happened, there has been other platforms like Black Men Heal. I have mine, Restoring the King. There's another one that I was affiliated with called Create the Space that talks about Black man vulnerability and things of that nature. So there are different innovative spaces out there for Black men. Specifically, I could talk about mine, and mine is a 6-week program that's dedicated toward Black men of all the diaspora. And we talk about the developmental parts of those unmet emotional needs. We talk about the different sociological and systemic things that Black men go through in a wellness space and in their life, because a lot of the times when we treat mental health, we don't treat the generational pain that comes along with the story of the Black man's story, right? And we oftentimes forget that, hey, Black men were severely taken down from their throne intentionally, right? And then a lot of the times men will try to seek that affirmation through people pleasing, right? Black men are so pleasing to women to the point where they start to get frustrated in their inability to kind of show up, because the system really isn't made for Black men to really shine. Like, I'll have a lot of Black men who are doing really well on paper, right? But when they're so afraid to really just truly be who they are, because they have so much in their psyche that gets triggered. And this is where we get into the study of epigenetics. And that's where you find DNA characteristic traits of trauma inside the body that are activated as a trauma response. So like when you see Black men running away from police, it's an instinct. You think a police is chasing me. I'm innocent. I need to run. And a lot of people are like, well, why do you run? I'm in survival mode. I don't know, because 500 years I've been killed and haunted. Like, it's a natural instinct to go, right? So a lot of the times when men come to my platform, it allows them the abilities to slow down, right? But first I had to create a space for safety.
That's powerful.
Because they can't really show up because they're in their ego, and ego is a defense mechanism. You know, that they show up in their masculinity of this is what a man, quote unquote, is supposed to be. And by the age of 5, we stop teaching men emotional intelligence because we put them in sports. We tell them to stop being a crybaby. We tell them that if they show too much affection, they're gay, right? But then you have some men that are emotional beings. Like, they're just emotional, affectionate men. I have a son that I'm raising in his emotional intelligence. I always have to counter people when they say, like, oh, you're babying him. You can't give enough black love to a Black boy.
Right.
What are you talking about, right? So it's just really that a lot of the stigma associated with wellness when it comes to Black men. A lot of time we really don't see the Black man as a victim because we're in our pain, right? And we're deriving and seeing them as aggressors rather than victims themselves of something, right? But a lot of the times when men come to my platform, they feel really supported because I don't judge them.
Right.
I just do that effective listening, which is I listen 80% and respond 20%, but I'm trying to understand them. I'm not judging them. I'm not telling them they're wrong for what they're doing. And what that does is it creates a space for them for those emotional needs to get met. Wow, she sees me. Wow, she hears me. Wow, she's affirming me, even in the midst of the painful things I've done in my pain. she's still honoring and respecting me and creating that safe space for me, so where I don't have to show up as the aggressor.
Right.
And I can't tell you how many times I've seen a black man cry on this platform.
Nia was able to experience something with one of her black kings, and I wanted her to share that experience and what that experience meant. Go ahead.
So last night when I was talking to you, I was actually coming back from a birthday event from one of my kings. He actually did a restorative healing experience for himself. So when he was younger, he went to juvenile hall, and part of his rehabilitation program was that they took all the youth out to go whitewater rafting, right? And they did like a skills building thing, and then he always remembered that. So for his birthday yesterday, he then went whitewater rafting as a different person, a different man. And because before I talk to you guys about the story of like epigenetics, right? So as a restorative healing component, what you do is you go back to what you did, right? That was a negative memory, and you rewrite that memory with something else that's positive, because positive supersedes, negativity, right? So yesterday he got to rewrite that story. And that's what we talk about, the what's the next, right? So his story was, I was a troubled youth, that had this experience that someone was giving to me, and a part of my healing process was going back. And so he went back to juvenile hall as a person that was not a part of the system, but now working for the children in the system. So he rewrote that story. And then yesterday he got to go back and whitewater raft as a man who's restored and healed, who's now doing that as a healthy, healed, whole man. So he no longer has to hold on to that story that I was an incarcerated youth anymore. Because sometimes we let our story be our story for too long when we're surpassed that part in our healing process. So that's one thing that he did. And I was really happy to share in that moment with him. And then one of the people were like, well, you're his therapist, why you shouldn't be here, right? And that's the difference between a wellness provider and maybe a therapist traditionally that ascribes themselves to the limitations around what a therapist can provide. Because in our community, our Black community specifically, we're tribal people. Right. So I don't show up as just his therapist. I'm his holistic healer. I'm in his community too. His success is my success. And if I can be another Black woman who shows up for him unconditionally, because there are no ties to us intimately, and just be that person who says, I see your growth, I honor your growth, I share with you in that growth, and you always have a platform to come back to. That's what I think I really want our Black healing spaces to come from, because the way that the system was set up traditionally for psychology, we really don't have an opportunity to share in those healing traditions with us. And so just being there for him healed me. It affirmed me. It was like, hey, listen, I told you how I started the platform. Like, literally, I was trying to mind my business, drink my water, and go to Bali. I got a message from my spirit that says you need to put this program on for Black men. I looked at my account and I said, listen, the way that my life is set up, my budget doesn't afford that. I'm trying to live my best life in Bali. But just do my obedience. I went ahead and I put on that program, and it was a one-day event. Got paid. The men were so gracious that I put it on. They ended up paying for the event themselves. And then they overpaid. So then I got more money to go to Bali. And then it ended up turning into a 6-week program, and the rest is history, right? So it just goes to show, like, listening to that intuition, sometimes you have to go against the grain to be that voice, to be that reason, because I never thought in my value that I would support Black men like this. If you would have told me this, I would have been like, not Nia. I got stuff to do.
Well, you said something that was powerful, though. You said we are tribal people.
Yeah.
But sometimes people don't feel like they have a tribe.
Yeah.
And how do you create that tribe? And what do you do for the people that don't feel like they have that tribe? Because that was a powerful saying you just said.
I try to be safe for people. That's really, even safe in my relationship, safe in my household, and try to demonstrate safety through vulnerability and self-compassion for myself first. And I think that a part of my healing story has been being a safe person, because I never really grappled the idea of feeling safe. I think we overlook the small need for safety in our community, in our family structures. And sometimes when we can't get that from our family, we do need our tribe to go to. And so I think that if we can start being inspired outside of ourselves to show up and be a safe person, that's the first step to true change in the Black community.
Amen. Amen. Sharie, what you have to say?
No, actually, I was going to ask you because you said that when you went on that rafting trip, it was a healing for you, and you said you had never thought you would be able to support Black men the way you support them now. Did you actually have trauma with Black men, maybe with your kid's father? Or,
Tons of it.
Yeah. So it kind of came around full circle where you actually was healed in the space that you probably need healed the most,
Right.
and now you're able to be a gift to someone else.
Yeah.
That's God is good. You
Yeah.
see how he did that?
Yeah.
Say, will you do it?
Yeah.
Yes, he will. All right,
Yes,
sis,
he
what
will.
you got? What's the thought? I'm reading your mind. I see the words.
Where are you from? Oakland?
San Jose.
San Jose? Oh,
Originally from Richmond.
Yeah.
Yes.
San Jose by way of Richmond. No, that was amazing, and it really gives me, I don't want to say a different perspective, but it gives me additional insight as far as how I'm going to show up for Black men. I have a Black son. I have 5 Black grandsons, and I have been so supportive of my Black women and just being there for my sisters, and have pretty much have taken the attitude that you don't have to put up with that, just leave or just get out of that situation, and have been so supportive to them that I have fallen short in being supportive of the Black men in my community. So I love what you're doing, and even if for me it looks like just supporting what's going on in my community, because I know there's a lot of male groups. There's the rite of passage and just a lot of stuff that I see going on, mostly for young men or boys and teenagers. But even if that looks like some type of support, whether I'm volunteering or donating something, but
You know, we all, as a community, as society, have failed Black men. And that has been the intention from the very beginning, to break that. And that goes all the way back when they wanted to separate. And so I was telling somebody not too long ago about how welfare came into place and how they was running into the house and to make sure the Black man was there so you could get money, but the Black man can't be there in order for you to get the money. So then the woman kicked the Black man out, and he couldn't come because if I came, then you messing with my money. So then that separated us. And it's just, I mean, it's trauma if you look at it all the way back from slavery, how they took a married couple who came over and they put the wife on this end and the husband on that end. It's like we raised Black strong women, but we have really forgot about our Black men.
And how they broke the Black man because when the master felt that that woman was his property, they raped the Black man's wife.
Yes.
And there was nothing he can do because a man's innate ability is to protect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But he couldn't do that.
So he felt helpless.
Exactly. He felt helpless.
And shameful.
Exactly. That he couldn't protect his kids. Exactly.
And I think the most important thing, because you asked me if I had trauma, so I have a son, and my son changed my life. Like having him changed my life because from my trauma with raising him, I didn't like him. And I'm like, why do I like have this like thing with him? Like
How old is he?
He's 5. And I was self-aware to know that my relationship or lack thereof with his father was causing me to have this undertone with him. I remember I was in the bathroom and he did something and I instantly like was about to smack him. But I caught myself and I just hugged him and started crying. And I was just like, I got to fix this. Because there is something, he's a child.
There was something you just said, and we're going to hit that when we come back after this break. We're back inside of Hot Topics with Lady Charmaine, and I had to extend this show because the information that Nia has been giving out has has been, to me, life-changing and powerful. And she had said something before we went to the break dealing with her son. And it triggered something in me that a young lady had told me that what her mom had did to her, because her mother didn't like her father and she looked so much like her dad, that she would get whoopings all the time. And it just made her angry. And so Nia said something that was so powerful. So when you talked about how you hugged your son and you cried because how you wanted to treat him, you just had this thing because of his dad. How did you figure that thing out?
Cause he was the baby, and he was just being a boy. I think at the time he was 3, and I had known that I was still in my healing process from just the pain of that, because I do understand. So his father has always been apologetic. But that's what I'm really big on, self-forgiveness. Because I wasn't mad at him anymore. I was mad at myself for, like I said, being a successful woman who knew better and did not choose to have standards for herself. Okay, so I was having a hard time being accountable for that. And what it was causing was a chain reaction, and it started to touch my son. And I'm like a don't play with my kids type mom. So I had to then be like that with myself. Don't play with my kids like that. Right. So I knew that something had to be healed in me. That God was really telling me, like, this is how bad it's gotten. Because your deal breakers. Right. And my 2 deal breakers is don't play with my money or my kids. Right.
Well.
And I started breaking my own deals with myself. And that let me know I started to come against my own self. And so a lot of women, I feel like we come against ourselves so much because of the promises that we make to ourselves and we don't keep them, that we get out of integrity with a relationship with ourselves. And so I just knew that I needed help to help heal me, because there was something that was deep in me that was broken. And so I'm a therapist with a therapist. I'm a therapist with a life coach. I'm all about like healing myself, because it's like, you get to a point where you were saying personal accountability and you have to put yourself in a situation. And there was hard truths that I wasn't really willing to realize about myself, because like I worked so hard not to be broken.
Right.
Outside of my pain, I had worked so hard aesthetically not to be broken. And who am I to like honor and say that about myself? But just going through the healing process and realizing that I didn't love myself enough to do it for myself, that I had to I love my kids more, actually. And that was another thing I had to come to terms with, is that I didn't love myself unconditionally. And it's just been, for me, it's been life-changing of learning how to love myself unconditionally, because there were so many conditions I placed on myself that it was kind of like a rabbit chasing a carrot down a hole. It was like, I'll do this for myself when that, and I'll do this for myself when this, and I'll do this for myself when that. Well, here you have it. You got a kid. You got kids. You can't wait to heal. Right. You got to heal right now. And it was just one of those things where I had to really come to terms with myself around, like, how long are you not going to acknowledge that you're broken?
Oh, that is so good. So if there's someone right now, they're listening, be it male or female, and they're looking for healing because what you said just touched their heart, and they're like, I need a therapist to talk this out. How can they find you?
Yeah, so they can talk to me on Therapy for Black Girls. I'm located on their listserv. I also have my own private practice. They can go on my website at ridgleconsulting.com.
You got to spell that last name.
So it's RIDGLE consulting.com. And then I'm also on LinkedIn. That's where a lot of my clientele comes from. Like I said, I work with high achieving women and in the realm of that. And I'm really always an advocate, so they can find me on a lot of different like talk shows and podcast shows too. I'm really personable. I'm on Instagram, ridgleconsulting.com. I really try to be a vessel for my community through my transparency. So I'm really an open book when it comes to like even sharing my restorative healing process, because it's an actual real thing. Like I'm not just a licensed practitioner. I'm actually like a holistic healer who's walking in her wholeness, and that's a whole nother thing that we don't talk about is that how do you go from a broken person to actually walking into wholeness and in that manifestation be able to like hold yourself to those standards when your habits are so habitual, right? So that's another thing that I really and really transparent about my journey, because like I'm only as powerful as my story, right? And if my story has power over me, then that means I'm not whole anymore, right? So I try to just show up as transparent. Even like we talk about the chakras, like my throat chakra has been something that I'm exercising. And if you guys see, I have this stone on, and this to me is cultural for me. It helps remind me to use my voice. You know, it helps remind me, and this other stone is a rose quartz. It helps me understand that I'm a heart-centered person. But just through my traumas, I built up walls and I stopped listening to my heart, right? Because I stopped trusting it. So it's just little things like that I use as like tools to make me be bigger than my insecurities, you know, to not continue to streak down, because I know that I'm in a space where I have a lot of information just through the unconditional love for myself, that it means that sometimes I have to, like, even though I want to be a mouse, I got to be a lion, you know? So I'm just a support to people, and I'm always a resource to people outside of, like, the aesthetics, the merit and things like that. Like, I am a woman, you know, I am a Black woman, and I do have a history, but most importantly, I'm a change agent, and I use my story to change people.
Amen.
That's good.
That was so powerful. Sharie, if somebody wanted to find you, how can they do that?
I am Sharie Wilson on Instagram, Facebook. Also Level Up with Sharie Wilson. But I am Sharie Wilson will connect you to all my other handles.
Okay. And Miss Fayette Latrice.
Just that. Fayette Latrice on all social media platforms, FayetteLatrice.com.
All right. And if you want to reach out to me, I am on Instagram at I am Lady Charmaine, Facebook, Lady Charmaine Live. You can also be a part of my Black Sisters Making Friends group right there on Facebook. We have another great event that's going to be coming up on July 10th, so make sure you mark your calendars. Details to come.